Our word of the week is life cycle. When we're thinking about how to manage our records, we often use the model called the record's life cycle. It's the idea that records, like plants, animals, or people, have a lifespan. In the record's life cycle, a record is born. It's created or received. During that record's life, it'll probably be stored and retrieved, maybe on a network or in a file cabinet or a record center. Then after a period of time, that record reaches its ultimate fate. Some records that have great historical value and meaning will go on to live forever in archives. Many other records will simply be deleted or destroyed when they no longer have value for the organization and its customers. Records managers do have different ways of looking at the lifespan of a record. This is the model we most often use when we talk about the life cycle. A record starts out its life when it's created or received. You might prepare a report, or you might receive a letter, a completed form, or an email from a customer. Throughout its life, that record is stored, maintained, and used. The record may be kept for a short period of time or for quite a long time, depending on the value it has for the organization, and hopefully it's maintained in a good record-keeping system so it can be easily retrieved and managed. We call that last step in a record's life its final disposition. The value that record has for the organization will determine whether it's kept forever in an archives or it's ultimately destroyed when it's no longer needed. Let's take a look at each of these steps. The first step, creation and receipt, is usually where we identify and capture that record. This is a critical step because the things we do up front help us ensure that the record can be found, used, and understood all throughout the rest of its lifespan. As you're capturing a record, you have the best chance to make sure that record can be connected to other related records, so you can have a complete picture of what happened or what work was done. You also have the chance to capture information that will help you and others understand the context of the record. For example, you might capture the title, author, or date of a document, or the project number or name. You might capture an email message's sender and recipients, its attachments, and all the other information you'll need to make sure you have the complete record. We also need to identify the record schedule that applies to the record. A record schedule is an official document that tells us how long each type of record needs to be retained, and the schedule tells us what ultimately will happen to that record. In the U.S. federal government, all record schedules are reviewed and approved by the National Archives. When we know what the schedule says, we can make better choices that will allow us to retrieve and manage the record throughout its whole lifespan. That first step in the life cycle is critical, but we still have more to do to make sure our records survive and thrive. When you're planning how you'll maintain and use your records, you'll want to make choices that help you and others find and manage the information quickly and easily. You can set up good paper and electronic storage and filing systems, and use tools like file plans to help everyone find what they need. You'll also look for ways to protect and back up your records, and you'll want to choose effective, good quality storage for those records so they're safe, secure, usable, and available to the people who need them for as long as they're needed. The final disposition for the record tells us its ultimate fate. In other words, what should happen to that record? The National Archives is the final home for a small but important percentage of the records in the federal government, somewhere around 2 to 5% of the records in most agencies. We call these permanent records. They have significant historical or other value that makes them worth keeping forever. For most agencies and companies, the vast majority of their records ultimately will be destroyed or deleted when they no longer have business, legal, or other value for the organization and its customers. The record schedule tells us how long those records must be kept and when they can be destroyed. In the federal government, we call these temporary records. We manage this phase of the life cycle through good procedures, policies, and systems that help us track and manage the transfer of records and the destruction of temporary records that have reached the end of their lifespans. So that's the record's life cycle. When you know what the record schedule says, and you're aware of the different stages in a record's life, you're better able to plan for and manage the things that need to happen at each point along the way. By having good procedures in place at the beginning of the life cycle, we can make sure that records are captured and stored in a way that helps us retrieve, manage, and understand the records for as long as they're needed. By having good record systems in place, we can make it much easier for everyone to locate, retrieve, and use the records when they're needed. And by recognizing and applying the right schedules to the right records, we can make sure we're keeping important information for the right amount of time. Good basic records management techniques will help us ensure that our most important records are preserved for future generations, and good management will help us weed out expired records so we can invest our time, our resources, and our space in the records we do need to keep. If you'd like more information about managing records throughout the life cycle, visit us online at archives.gov.